With 1/4 of the United States in some form of self-quarantine going on at the moment, all of us are wondering a little bit what's going to happen. Well, we've all heard about the good effects of the quarantine. It's helping preserve our health and the health of others. But what are the psychological effects of being quarantined? Hi, I'm Dr. Greg Cason, and this is Off the Couch. I live in California. We currently have a stay-at-home order for the entire state. That's 40 million people. And during that stay-at-home order, all the bars, restaurants, gyms, all non-essential businesses, pretty much everything is closed. And people are having to stay in to protect themselves, their health, and protect the health of others. We can see people, but we're advised to keep a distance of 6 feet, which people call social distancing. We have to wash and sanitize our hands constantly, so much so that my hands are already starting to crack. But have we looked at the psychological effects of being self-quarantined? To understand the possible psychological effects that could happen to all of us while we're in this quarantine period, I looked at a 2004 study in the journal Emerging Infectious Diseases. And this study looked at the psychological effects of being quarantined during the SARS epidemic. Now, for those of you who don't remember, SARS stood for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, and it was also a coronavirus, just like COVID-19, the one we're dealing with now, and it also had a high mortality rate. Now, SARS was contained globally by doing the very thing that we're doing now, which is instituting widespread quarantine provisions or quarantine measures throughout the world. Now, the study I'm looking at came out of Toronto, Canada, and they had approximately 15,000 people on quarantine in Toronto, so not the whole city, but a good number. The study looked at 129 people who went through the quarantine period, and they found some very interesting things. Now, although all people who took the study felt that they felt some sort of sense of isolation, about 1/3 of people had some sort of depression or PTSD. Now, let's just define depression for you. We all feel sad, but depression is something a bit more severe. Depression is a sense of worthlessness, helplessness, and hopelessness, and it's combined with changes in eating, sleeping, or sex. There are a few more things that go along with it, but also it may include suicidal ideation. PTSD is a more severe syndrome. It's an anxiety syndrome. It usually happens once one is either observed or gone through a life-threatening trauma. And PTSD has a certain cluster of symptoms that happen. One is avoidance, where you try to avoid things that might bring memory of that trauma back. You have sense of arousal, where you just have all these symptoms come up all the time. You're a little more jumpy, etc. And chronic re-experiencing, where memories of the trauma just come flooding back to you unexpectedly at any time. Now, the longer duration someone was in quarantine actually resulted in worse symptoms. Now, I don't think that's too much of a surprise, but it was something that really happened. And acquaintance with it or direct exposure to someone who had SARS also resulted in increased depression and PTSD symptoms. Now, quarantines have been used effectively in other diseases. Throughout the ages, people didn't have any kind of medication or vaccine, so quarantines were the prevention method of choice. Now, quarantines have been known to evoke generalized fear in people who are quarantined, a lack of understanding, discrimination, economic hardship, and even rebellion. But what really can help someone who's been quarantined? What can really make things a little bit better? Well, you know, maybe not surprisingly, one of the most helpful things that has been shown, and was shown in the study of the people who suffered in the SARS quarantine, was just having good information. It seemed that having clear reasoning for the quarantine and good information about what was happening about not only SARS, but the SARS epidemic and what was going on and what methods were being taken to contain it, helped the people who were in quarantine. They understood their purpose, they understood what was being done, and they understood that there was a clear endpoint. The problem was there was about 30% who had a very negative effect on the quarantine, and those people reported that they thought they did not receive adequate information about SARS, about why they were being quarantined, or what was going to happen. Those people, as a result, reported feeling angry, frustrated, disappointed, and anxious. Also, perhaps not surprisingly, people with lower income reported increased PTSD and depression symptoms, and I think that's quite notable. When you have a low income to begin with, you might be living paycheck to paycheck. You just might not know what's going to happen. You may have saved for a rainy day, but maybe you didn't save for a rainy month. This is really a scary time, and also so many people are losing their jobs. They don't know what they're going to do once the quarantine is over. So it's not surprising that those people who may have a lower income are feeling more scared and more downtrodden during this time, and those people we need to take a good look at to try to help them through this period. Now, like I said, all respondents reported a sense of isolation, and isolation is one thing that will increase our stress and actually increase any underlying symptoms that we have. If you happen to have an eating disorder, or you already have depression, anxiety, any sort of thing, just that underlying isolation and disconnection from other people may actually increase those other symptoms. So it's good to be especially vigilant and pay attention to what's going on with you. And I'm going to talk about some tips right at the very end. But another thing that I've noticed especially, and we noticed this in the study with the SARS people who suffered in the SARS epidemic, people who have to monitor their symptoms. And if you find yourself, as I know I have and I know all my friends have, if you find yourself monitoring your symptoms during this time, you're actually going to increase your anxiety. So if you're checking your temperature every few hours, or you're a little miffed about a little cough you might have, or you start to worry about maybe some scratch in your throat, it may be that you've got the illness, but that might be less rare, because right now when you pay attention to those symptoms, that's actually going to make those symptoms feel like they're bigger, and it's going to actually cause you to experience more exacerbated symptoms, and your anxiety will just go through the roof. So a good thing to do right now is to put down the thermometer and just allow your body to have the feelings it has, and focus on other things, especially on other people, even if they're not in the room. Now, what can you do to help yourself through this period? I actually outline a few things that will help you get through this hopefully less scathed than perhaps you would have if you didn't do these things. The first thing I can tell you is to maintain routines. This is the hardest thing that's a lot of people have. A lot of people are taking advantage of this time, remaining in their pajamas all day, not showering or bathing, maybe eating in the middle of the night, whatever it is, they're just throwing themselves off. This is one of the more dangerous things you could do. This is fine to do for a day or a weekend. It's not fine to do on an ongoing basis, because you will lose touch with what day it is, what time it is, and you will lose touch with your own basic routine. So one thing I would advise you do is to follow the exact routine that you were doing before the quarantine started. Get up at the same time, go to bed at the same time. If you shower at 8 o'clock, continue showering at 8 o'clock. If you work at 9 o'clock, start your work at 9 o'clock. And go to the gym the same time. All the gyms are closed, so you can't go to a gym, but do a floor workout, or take a walk, or do some sort of physical activity, and try to work a physical activity in every single day. The second thing I'm going to tell you to do is to maintain connections. Even though we have to stay separate from people, except perhaps the people in your household, it is good for you still to talk with and maintain connections. You know, we're very lucky right now that we have electronic means like FaceTime and Skype and texting and all these sorts of things that you can at least talk to other people and sort of see what they're doing, check in on them, say hello. And if you don't have someone to check on it, one thing I'd even advise that you do is just to go through and do a little texting yourself. That might be very helpful. A third thing, I mentioned it before, was physical health, and that would be physical exercise and nutrition. Hey, if you didn't do physical exercise before, that's the one thing I'm going to say, maybe you can start introducing that right now. I'm not saying to do a great deal, but maybe to do a 10-minute walk to the corner and back if you're allowed to go outside. If for some reason you're not allowed to leave your place because maybe perhaps you've been exposed to someone but aren't showing symptoms, then maybe a little walk around the apartment a couple of times just to move your bones, just to sit and stretch. Something is going to help. One thing that's going to help is to do some kind of physical movement during this time. Also, it's good to pay attention to your nutrition. We're all going to be tempted to gorge during this time, just to eat junk because we're around the refrigerator all the time, or at least I noticed I'm doing that. So during this time, it's good just to, if you are going to eat a little extra, try to put some healthy foods in there. Just a little bit will help. One thing to do as well, to pay attention to, is working from home. That in maintaining routines, we may have work as part of it. So if you're going to work, I'm going to advise you do exactly these things. Like I said before, maintain the same times you do every day. 9 to 12 work, 12 to 1 lunch, 1 to 5 work, and you're off. During that time, set up the environment for work. Clear a desk. Don't do anything but work at that desk. That desk is only for work, and at 5 o'clock, stop working there. Do not use that desk for anything else. Also, it's good for you to dress for work. When you dress, you put yourself into a different mindset. So if you're dressed appropriately, it's going to help you be more productive and more focused. And speaking of focus, I know a lot of you take your phones and text at work and probably waste a lot of time on the computer, looking at Amazon, etc. This would be one time I'm going to advise that you really try to disconnect from those things, except during defined breaks as much as you can. Also, no dogs, no kids while you're working. Tell them you can see them at your lunchtime, you can see them after work, you can say a quick hello, but during that time, daddy or mommy need to be working. And as I talked before, we are going to feel increased depression, or at least a lot of us will, and PTSD, which is an anxiety symptom. But almost all of us are going to have anxiety during this time. In fact, I was walking home and I saw a guy and he was saying, I'm feeling this anxiety and I just got to use my tools, my cognitive behavioral tools. And I was like, that's great, that's great. That's what we all need. And perhaps we'll get there to be able to teach all of you those tools. But in the meantime, one thing that you can do is to just work on some general tips to decrease your anxiety. Take a look at my other video, the video that says quick emotion fixes. There I go over some of these things. Also to know that anxiety is really helped by a couple of very basic things. One is just relaxation. That's no surprise, but it doesn't have to just be doing some sort of meditation. You can also do things that are relaxing to you. Needlepoint, playing with your kids, petting your animals, watching an old movie. All of those are wonderful relaxation techniques. Number 2 is assertiveness. So remember, maintain your social connections, be with other people, say what you want, say what you're feeling, don't hide those feelings. Let them know what you're feeling, ask what they're feeling, really connect during this time. And number 3 is sexual arousal. So, it's good to be connected with your partner in whatever way you can during this time. And the last thing I want to leave you with is that we're all in this together. That's the one thing you want to remember. You're not alone during this quarantine. You're one of many people. I'm one of almost 40 million Californians. We're one of 1/4 of the United States. It will soon expand. I can only think that it will expand, and of course there are quarantines and stay-at-home rules for much of the world going on right now. This is a really tough time, so we do have to remember that all of us are in this together, all Americans and all citizens of the world. We're all in this together, and together we can pull through. I'm Dr. Greg Cason, and this is Off the Couch.